Here's Mark and Suzanne, revolutionizing radio.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the Mark and Suzanne Show. I am Mark, she is Suzanne, and we're glad you joined us on this momentous day, shall we say. And, you know, we decided in light of what's happening in Washington, D.C., to take some time and go ahead and do a show today so that we can take advantage of the teachable moment that is going on right now in the Senate confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh for the next Associate Justice to the Supreme Court. And we've got a lot of ground to cover, folks. I wanted to start out that this is prima facie evidence as to why I say the Constitution does not hold solutions. Not that it couldn't, but it doesn't. And you have heard round after round after round of testimony, both by Kavanaugh and Republicans and Democrats, asserting that the Constitution is pretty much what they decide the Constitution means. Now, they'll throw in tidbits here and there about original intent, but let me tell you, if you watched any of it, there ain't no original intenting going on up there. So I'm glad you joined us. We're going to take some time and really break this down for you. We think this is a great teachable moment to help you pry this kind of idea from your head that the solutions that we to the problems we face here in hashtag this exceptional American Union come from Washington, D.C. Folks, they do not. They do not. This is prima facie evidence that they do not. This is exculpatory evidence for me that I'm proven right again. And it's not hard, actually. If you actually do know anything about the Constitution, if you do know the reasons for the Philadelphia Convention, what led to it and all that, you can watch these debates and see, oh my gosh, are we in trouble, folks. So I'm glad you joined us again. I'm Mark. She is Suzanne. How you doing, Suzanne?
Oh, it's been quite a morning. Boy, we've got a trifecta of teachable moments going on right now, which is why I'm so glad we took the opportunity to actually reach out to people and clarify some of our opinions on what we've been trying to say. You know, there have been so many nationalist focuses right now taking us away from what is really important. We've got the distraction of the passing of the Senator John McCain, and he's been shuffled around this continental landmass, and we're hearing about what a wonderful man he was, a man that never met a war he didn't like, a man that handed the dossier to the FBI as a means of usurping the will of the people who had chosen Donald Trump as their presidential candidate for the Republican Party. But that wasn't good enough for deep state swamp dwellers like John McCain. They were going to play dirty. And we've got, let's see now, the round of the confirmation hearings for, as you mentioned earlier, I referred to him as the Black Robe Messiah, Brett Kavanaugh, coming up. And then we have, of course, one that's got everybody upset. I will say yesterday was probably the best day on the internet ever for memes. My goodness. But then we had the whole Colin Kaepernick Nike issue. And as I've discussed in my article from Church of National Government, this whole thing arose from the federal government wanting to promote recruitment into the military, because clearly we need to come up with ways to get more people, more fodder for the cannons, so we can march on towards our never-ending wars and imperial domination of this global enterprise. As we know now, the Navy is a global force for good. Compare that with the principles upon which we were founded. Here at the Cerberus Radio Network, folks, one of the ways we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny is by trying to keep our government representatives honest. What is this government supposed to do? And as we are kind of realizing, there's no good way to make this work. Yeah. The flaws were written into this document. And those that are enlightened try to say, well, yeah, we have we the people, the Supremacy Clause, the Commerce Clause focus. It goes way deeper than that, far more nefarious. They were brilliant in how they buried this. We talked about Article 2, powers of the president to appoint officers for pretty much positions not here and yet defined. So what they're saying is we're going to make it up as we go along. The treaty power. Well, we have a treaty power, so we can have a treaty power that circumvents the intent of a limited government, Case in point, the small arms treaty with the United Nations, but it's a treaty. We talked about the Louisiana Purchase. Constitutionally, maybe it did pass muster, but I would say that was probably in the letter, if not but definitely not the spirit of the Constitution. Listen to our last show. I think that was Tuesday when we were on. And, one of the reasons Massachusetts threatened to secede was this was going to be a fundamental transformation. They've been fundamentally transforming this under the auspices of the Constitution before the ink was dry on the holy parchment. Folks, you can listen to us here at Cerberus Radio Network. We are on SoundCloud. You can share, and you can also download the information, our shows for free. We are on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. Also, please subscribe, follow, share, tell people. Mark, I struck a nerve today. I have been trying to alert people that, if we really want to pay homage and respect our veterans and honor them and thank them for their services and sacrifices, we need to have a conversation about not using them as cannon fodder anymore. That's not disrespecting them. That's honoring them. What we're doing is disrespecting these greedy who keep sending them into harm's way. Yeah. And for what? And the thing that got the whole ball rolling yesterday, there is now where rather than having Colin out there, we're showing pictures of Pat Tillman, very honorable man, I'm sure, who gave up a illustrious career in the National Football League and was killed by friendly fire in Afghanistan. And for everybody hailing him as a hero, I'm not saying he wasn't, but I said, was it worth it? Mark, if this was one of your children, would you say Pat Tillman's death made anything better?
This is one of these great, difficult questions that we have to deal with. And see, most people only want to deal with these in a kind of an emotional frame of reference. We have to go back to people claim to be adherents to the Constitution. Now, a basic premise of the Constitution is that statute cannot change a constitutional provision. You can't the only way to change the Constitution is through the amendment process, through Article 5. So we have the War Powers Act. We have now what we call authorization use of military force. We have all these new statutory ways to add additional powers that the Constitution just does not grant to the executive or to the Congress. So we have a very specific process to go to war. It is in Article 1, Section 8. Congress declares it. Now, inherent in the commander-in-chief's position in Article 2 is his ability to respond defensively. If China launched their troop carriers today and started heading them for California, the president, without an act of Congress, would be able to defend the western part of the country. He would be able to call up whatever troops he needed to defend, because inherent, he has that responsibility as commander-in-chief to defend. Now, name the last war we went that wasn't an offensive military operation without a declaration of war. You can't name one in our lifetime. So there's all these things that are going on that Congress uses and the executive uses military power for foreign policy goals that may be legitimate, but there's a process we're supposed to follow. And yet people will claim that their guy is following the Constitution. And this takes us right back to the ongoing drama up there in Capitol Hill right now, related to hearings. Everybody up there is talking about the Constitution, no matter who is doing the interviewing, whether it's Dianne Feinstein.
Oh, that was painful.
Whether it's, it's horrible. Any of them. It doesn't matter who's asking the questions up there. They're using the term Constitution. One proper use of the provisions within the Constitution from either any of the senators nor from Kavanaugh himself. I mean, he went on the record today saying that he doesn't live in a vacuum. He takes into consideration the real world as he's making a decision. Folks, I just just that term. Then don't listen to anything else I say or Suzanne says. If that means nothing to you, that a judge for the Supreme Court is going to sit up there and say, I take into account the real world when I make my decisions. I don't want. Where is that a provision that a judge should consider, a justice for the Supreme Court should consider, as he or she is supposedly determining the nature and the application of the Constitution? Where is that, folks? These guys just
was excoriated for that. Remember when she said we should look to the rest of the world, or we would?
Right.
But Kavanaugh, yay! You know, this was the folks. Remember when we were considering electing President Trump, we need that Supreme Court justice so we can overturn Roe versus. We're one vote away. What did we hear today? We had Roe versus Wade and Casey. What did he say? Precedent upon precedent. Meaning we're going to pile the you-know-what higher and higher and higher. I see Greg is raising his hand in the background. Yes, Greg. Greg Carpenter, junk bond here.
Hey, Greg.
Greg Carpenter, he's the latest addition to our network. We are delighted to have him. This guy is one of the smartest people I have ever met, intelligence background, and he's coming on. We have some Liberty Minutes with him. You can find them on our SoundCloud page, as well as the YouTube page, host of Reverse Deception on another network, as well as a book entitled Reverse Deception. Go ahead.
I feel fundamentally transformed, in case anybody was curious.
Yeah, we all are.
And I'm not sure I like it that much. I will say that I have several friends who died while I was in combat, and I can't see or feel or understand any difference between now and them, except that they're not here anymore. I was stationed with the Army up in New York during 9/11, and one of our jobs was to be the alternate emergency operations center for the New York City Department of Emergency Management, the police department, fire department, all those guys. And we ended up being not necessarily first responders, but my team showed up around 5 p.m. on September 11th, down to ground zero. We called it the pit. And there was not one. Well, let me put it like this. I spent 2 weeks there. And I didn't end up going home for about 3 weeks. But the 2 weeks that I spent there, I can't tell you that I found more than a forearm that was charbroiled in that pit. I couldn't find anything that resembled a human whatsoever. And to think that we lost 3,000 people, and now we continue on the rampage of spreading democracy with a sword, we find that we have nothing but anger and hatred towards us because of what we do, thinking that we're better than everybody else. And this goes back to something Suzanne and I were talking about a little bit earlier, patriotism versus nationalism. Nationalist says, my country is better than yours. My country is the best in the world. I think we've heard that before. USA, USA, USA. The never-ending chant. The patriot questions the government. The patriot has the insight to look into what's going on and say, okay, there could be a problem here with what my government is trying to do. It is time for me to step up with all my comrades here, my friends, my neighbors, my town, and correct it at whatever level of government that is. And that hasn't happened in about 230 years. Because of that, we've left government to run amok on its own. And you have the courts where somebody the other day just said to me, well, the Federalists, they lost in Philadelphia.
What?
And I'm thinking to myself, a human can only smoke so much crack in one day and still live to the next day to tell about it. You, my friend, have pushed that limit as far as possible. If you did not happen to notice the federal courts and how badly they were stacked with Federalist judges right at the turn of the 15-second mark, then you probably missed the rest of what happened in American history from 1789, from the ratification on. And you've just lost everything. One of the biggest problems we have is that we have federal courts still.
Yeah.
Wish they would correct that, amongst other things. But
Greg,
that's my 2.5 cents.
You raised some really excellent points, and there is a conflation of patriotism to loving government. There is a big difference between loving your country, your nation, and loving the government that is in the country, nation. And unfortunately, so many people, conservatives in particular, conflate the two ideas together. And so therefore, if you have anything bad to say about this corrupt government, you, in a sense, are being accused of saying something bad about your fellow citizens, your country, and all that, which has been an unbelievable propaganda coup by the government. I mean, they have been brilliant at being able to get these two concepts conflated so much and ingrained in people's minds that when you assault the nomination process for a associate justice of the Supreme Court, you hate America. You hate where you live. And I think, the work we have to do to try to decouple people's minds from that is the only way I know to do that is by telling truth. Jesus said in John 14, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. We have to be truthful about this, no matter how much it might gore a sacred cow, no matter how, otherwise we're not really people of truth. We're politically expedient people. We're red team versus blue team, and right now the red team's on the field, so we got to do whatever we can to get a red victory. Well, what if the red victory is wrong? Well, too many of my politically conservative friends will say, well, Mark, that's just how the system works. Well, I then don't want this system. Don't want the system. The system is a bad system if it produces a guy who will sit there and say, precedent upon precedent, translated, another 3,000 babies will be legally murdered today. And I'm supposed to cheer that? I don't want friends like that to tell me, well, you don't love America, Mark, if you don't support this. Well, then call me what you want. I love truth. And the bottom line is right now in Oklahoma, it is 118. So far, probably somewhere around 11 babies have been legally butchered by a government that I'm supposed to love. Are you kidding me? Have we sunk that low? Is partisanship so important to us? Is red versus blue so critical to us that we can't pry through it and say, I want truth. I don't want this. I don't want a guy sitting there saying Matthew 25, which it does say, tells us to love the least of those among us. He quoted that properly and then properly said, I care for the homeless. What he should have done is say, and you know, Senator Graham, the Supreme Court was wrong in its disgusting, evil ruling in 1973, and therefore I withdraw my nomination for this court because it made itself illegitimate when it ruled that way. He should have got up, tipped over his chair, and walked out. Now, we'd have been talking about that. How long would we have been talking about that? For weeks. We just said, finally, somebody did something. Instead, he quotes Jesus talking about caring for the least of these amongst us. Yet, who is the weakest, most least amongst us? It's that baby right now who's being walked into a murder clinic, and some executioner, some assassin is going to take a pair of forceps and going to rip it apart. And I'm supposed to be happy with this process that nominates and then confirms through advice and consent the next associate justice of the Supreme Court. Folks, you've got to get your morality lined up. And Christians, your first obligation is not to that process. It is not to this government. Your first devotion is to your Savior. Do you think if he was sitting in that audience, he would say, well, boy, old Brett was real clever on that answer. That was a good one. Do you think Jesus would sit there and just that was a good answer? Politically expedient.
If I had been in court, objection, Your Honor, non-responsive. Yeah. This is exactly what Hillary Clinton got away with when they said, do you believe a baby does not have constitutional rights until the moment it is born? And rather than saying the truth, which was, yes, I believe that a baby can be taken apart limb from limb as long as it doesn't pass through that magical birth canal. That's what she should have said. Yeah, she just said, well, I believe in Roe versus Wade. Yay! Everybody cheered because we're so stupid and so desperate to have our preconceived notions validated by gibberish. Jeff, you've been waiting. I'm going to call on you and let you chime in here. You've been very patient.
Well, you guys are so far beyond where I was going to chime in at, but I'm going to back us up a little bit because I want to go back to something. Greg and Mark, you both took the same oath I did. You raised your right hand and swore that you would protect and defend the Constitution of the United States.
As did I.
And unfortunately, what's that? And you did too, I think, because as a lawyer, didn't you?
Yep.
Did you? Yeah. Okay. All four of us have taken that ooth.
I was trying to avoid the lawyer.
Okay.
But that's a lawyer taking.
All four of us have taken that oath.
My fingers were crossed.
Yeah. Here's the deal. The problem is you got these people that are using veterans as a tool, complaining about us ridiculing not the veteran, because we're not ridiculing the veterans. The veterans, I have been there with a family, with a friend in uniform at the airport while he collected his son out of the cargo hold. And I do not wish that on anybody. And so I get completely offended by these folks that go and make this about the veteran. It's not about the veteran. It's about the megalomaniacs in Washington, D.C.
Yes, right.
That's who we're talking about. It's not about these veterans. They have my respect. The people in Washington, I despise, and I have no respect for them. They're not honorable, and there's nothing about them that I honor or respect. And now you guys are like,
a while back, a friend of mine had posted a picture of 3 flags. He had the United States flag, the Marine Corps flag, and the Gadsden flag. And the stars and stripes were displayed upside down. And of course, the resulting brouhaha resulted immediately. And one person put forth the following question to him: are we to say that those that fought in Vietnam, their time was wasted? And I thought, that's a good question. Was it?
Yes.
What did we gain from Vietnam? Do you know anybody that has a son or daughter that was lost in that war and that sacrifice was justified? And this is what I think is very difficult. The sacrifices are so immense. We are losing our husbands, our wives, our sons, our daughters, our family members, these precious people to our families. Imagine how painful it would be, adding insult to injury, to say it was for nothing. I totally get why they say that. I have 2 boys now of fighting age myself. There is nothing going on in this world right now that is worth sacrificing their lives over.
I agree with that. I think you have a very good point there. Back to Mark's issue about the process. We've all heard garbage in, garbage out. But when you have a problem where your process is in a position where you have quality and garbage out, which is where we are, There is no way to fix that process. That process has to be completely revamped.
Right.
They make you think that by electing the right person, et cetera, you'll be able to do that. I pulled up some political banter back from the 1860s and 1840s that talks exactly to that point. One of them was in a campaign against John Taylor for president, and he was on the vice president ticket at the time. John Tyler. And it said something along the lines that, you get this guy, and this guy's a know nothing, do nothing kind of a guy. And our vice president guy is so much better. I'm not going to get into the whole thing because I just wrote down quick notes from it, but I can put them together and definitely bring up all of them now. But that stuff's been around forever. We've seen it forever. And there's nothing new. Again, I mean, we can go back to Ecclesiastes where it says there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Right.
Pardon me. Still have the whooping cough.
Yeah, I hear it.
Not quite done that yet, but we've been co-opted against. And when you take a face and you remove a face from a problem, that problem becomes too big, too important, and too impossible to deal with. We've done the anthropomorphification of the government and turned it into a living entity without a face. Thereby, the soldiers are part of that. And if you say something in a negative way against government actions that involve soldiers, it immediately transcends the government and has to go somewhere where people can identify, and that's where that face is, and that's with the soldier. And therefore, for some reason or another, it's perceived that you are attacking the soldier. I served 27 years in the Army. I thought I was doing the right thing at first. I was the gung-ho nutcase. I had a choice. They said, gosh, you can go into a highly technical field, or you can go out and shoot people and jump out of planes. Well, I said, hey, I like shooting people, and I like jumping. I'm from New York, why wouldn't I like to shoot people and jump out of planes? Well, everybody likes to jump out of planes, I figured. When I got to the school there, I found out very few of us actually enjoyed it. More of us were terrified than others. But as my time went on, I began to learn and question things that were happening. I questioned why our unit went out every day. We were complaining about how much fuel usage we had, but yet every Tuesday morning we had to go out and drive in our armored vehicles down to a certain point, turn around and drive back. And it wasn't to make sure that the vehicles worked. It's because the Russians had satellites overhead and they were looking for us to go out all the time like that, so we could have something to show them that we were still right on track with us, but we were wasting the fuel just because. All those types of things that government does is something that you can't address without a face to it. And when you have the people that are not elected, you have the people that are not accountable. And if they're not accountable, they really don't exist in the process. And therefore, they're going to get off scot-free, or with very little or very few of them are actually going to get tagged in any way as being responsible for any issue. And if something does happen where they are responsible for an issue, all of the demons of the world will be cast upon them for a short, brief time before people throw their hands back up in the air and say, my goodness, the government isn't working again. What happened? Why are we having a government shutdown? Now, I would be cheering a government shutdown. I think that's one of the best things in the world we could do. I don't have to wait in traffic out here in Mordor. I can drive anywhere I want and use a realistic arrival time and travel time. I have a life again. Mm-hmm. The other 3-4 million people that moved down here to D.C. since September 11th have really gummed up the works down here. They should be back in their own homes. I would like for them to go back home again, and for my government to go back. And remember, it's not even a 10-mile square anymore. It's only part of that little 10-mile square because Virginia took it back. Mm-hmm. And I'm surprised that, after the Civil War, the federal government didn't take it back from Virginia and say, hey, we're taking back our portion of D.C., pal. You better give it to us. Now, they subsequently moved the military complex over there. All the contractors are in the Pentagon City and Crystal City. So they essentially own it all anyways. But I thought that would be one of the, I look for that in the history books and try to figure out why they didn't just take it all back and make it all part of DC again.
Let's restore it to its natural condition. You know, when your comment about the unelected workers that we have, these bureaucrats that are unaccountable, that goes exactly to the epiphany that we had the other day. Mark, you were talking about that with that other part of Section 2. I'm gonna, for people that are tuning in after, by the way, we're going to be getting a lot of free advertising. Somebody's on a rampage to shut me down. So if you have anything to promote, put it on my page, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of trolls heading over there. But let's talk a little bit about that Article 2 power that we were discussing, Mark. You know, it seems to me that the president can elect anybody he wants and have any department he wants now.
You know, a lot of people have over the years wondered, how did this thing grow to the size that it did? For years, I myself would say things like the APA is unconstitutional, the Department of Homeland Security is unconstitutional, all those sorts of things. I would say, because there's really no provision in Article 1, Section 8 that expressed a delegated power to Congress to create that. And as someone who has tried to treat the document fairly and honestly, all the way from its inception in 1787 to its current use, I began to try to figure out, where did this thing go wrong? And lo and behold, I came up with a kind of a hidden, if you will, set of powers that the Congress and the executive share. And so it really takes understanding, you just quoted from Article 2, Section 2, the appointments power of the president, who he can appoint. Well, if there isn't an agency there to appoint a head to, guess what Congress can do under that appointments power according to Article 2, Section 2. And then if you read Article 1, Section 8, the necessary and proper clause, and pretty much every conservative I know, let me pull it up real quick and I can read it, because I want you to really get this. Hang on 1 second. It's going to take me 1 second. Article 1, what was that? Article 1, Section 8. I want you to see this. And I want you also to see it so you don't think I'm just making this up, because I'm not. But it began to explain, help me understand a lot that went wrong and why it's gone wrong and why the Congress really does have a lot more power. And this is from someone who used to work there, by the way. I worked as a senior legislative assistant for 2 Republican members of Congress there, folks. George Wortley from upstate New York and Richard Baker from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I worked in the belly of the beast. And I don't say that to pat myself on the back. I'm more frustrated myself that I didn't understand a lot of this back then. Though clearly I can assure you of this. One thing that is kind of just common on Capitol Hill, none of us were walking around whipping our pocket constitutions out when we were involved with a lobbyist or anybody else who's pushing a certain agenda, or even a member of Congress who's pushing a certain agenda. Nobody was walking out, whipping out their constitution and saying, do we have any authority to do this? Nobody does that. That's just, the Constitution is for the people to believe that their elected officials are following it. They're not. There's things that I did were not constitutional. For some reason, I can't bring up it on my computer since that stupid Windows update is crashing.
Mark, is that Constitution? Does that start with a C? Constitution?
Yes.
I'm still having trouble finding it here in DC.
Are you looking for that part in Article 2?
Yeah, no, Article 1, Section 8. If
Article
you could bring that up. Yeah, after the comma, because so often conservatives quote this, and they like the part before the comma, but they don't like the part after the comma and the necessary and proper clauses. Suzanne, do you have it there?
And all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Would that be the one?
That would be the one. So here you have an explicit delegated power to the Congress to create these other offices that are found in other powers within the Constitution. See, Article 1, Section 8 is not the totality of the powers this government has. Article 2, Section 2, under the executive branch, the president can appoint. He has appointment powers, ambassadors, special envoys, and then, as Suzanne quoted earlier, these heads of departments. So when you put the two together, Article 1, Section 8, the necessary and proper clause after the comma, and you put the president's appointment powers together, Houston, I don't think I can say anymore that most of these agencies are unconstitutional. These agencies that then go on to steal property, then go on to oppress people, that then go on to listen to people's iPhones, that then go on to capture their emails, that then go on to do all these nefarious things, that then go on to redistribute property under a socialist construct, taking from one and giving to another. All these agencies that have been created, and then Congress abdicates its lawmaking authority to them. They go on and do all this stuff, and I stop and I think, oh no, this actually may be constitutional. So I used to say that I was not supportive of a bipartisan, corrupt, morally bankrupt, illegitimate national government located in Washington, D.C. I now have to reconsider taking the word illegitimate out of it. Now, it may be illegitimate morally, but it may actually be constitutionally legitimate what it is doing. So this idea now, as we talked about last week, Suzanne, earlier in the week, we're seeing this again play out. And I want to take advantage of this teachable moment that's going on right now, because a lot of conservatives are just glued in on these confirmation hearings. They're breathlessly waiting for, somebody to respond with some, profound idea and get their guy through. There's a certain reality to what you're seeing up there, and you're actually hearing it. They're actually exposing and playing their hand, and they're all generally admitting that the Constitution is a living document. Again, you heard Kavanaugh earlier say, when I make a decision, when I make a ruling, I take into consideration the real world effects of my decision. Well, there's interpretive models that are out there. One of them is called originalism. We talked about that earlier in the week, Suzanne, with Antonin Scalia. Not very originalist, by the way. Textualism, pragmatism. There's a number of models. The very fact that there's a number of models should be a hint to us that there's something wrong, because you can pick and choose the model you want to use to interpret the Constitution. Notwithstanding the fact Madison did say you should view the Constitution through the ratification, but that was his opinion. That's not statutorily written anywhere, and it's certainly not in the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't even explain how it's to be interpreted. There was no immediate statutory guidance on how to interpret the Constitution. So what do you have? And I'm going to give you some more truth here. Again, what you're going to hear from us on the Cerberus Radio Network is truth. It may be uncomfortable truth. It may be one of those mind-blowing truths, but that's okay. Right now, we need truth. We don't need more of the Kabuki Theater in Washington, D.C. So on July, I think it was July 10th or July 4th of 1798, there was a, June, I think it's June 26th, and Adam signed it July 10th. I may have my dates a little off here, but June of 1798, they're on the House floor debating what was called the Sedition Act. The Sedition Act was a provision put forward that would essentially limit free speech, right? The First Amendment. The First Amendment is there now. Now, Congress is debating this. You can read it in the congressional record. I've read the entire debate. There are two groups of people there. There are the Federalists, which would loosely be equated to today's Republicans and Democrats. And there were the Democrat Republicans there, the Jeffersonian kind of party there. They're on the House floor. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak on this. The Democrat Republicans are making ratification arguments from the ratification. This is what they told us back in the ratification. They're making First Amendment arguments. They are arguing from the Philadelphia Convention, right? This is their argument. You read it, you think, well, this is going to be a slam dunk. There's no way these guys will vote to pass the Sedition Act that came out of the Senate. Federalists get up there and they talk about political expediency. They talk about the danger of the French. They talk about the need to protect the government, the need to protect their institutions. They're not trying to argue with the Democrat Federalists because the deals were already made before the vote ever happened. It ended up going down 44-41. The Democrat Republicans lost. With a vote in Congress, you can check this out yourself. They violated the Constitution in 1798. Folks, that's 11 years after ratification. I could give you many more earlier than that. So when you begin to take time and really consider, how did we get into this mess? It never said how to interpret it. So you're left with many different camps of people saying, well, this is how you interpret it. Interpret it this way. No, you interpret it this way. And then you end up in the 21st century here in Senate confirmation hearings with them all essentially admitting, I heard Lindsey Graham talking about why he voted for Sotomayor and what was the other, Kagan. And he said, he proudly said, I voted for her. And while obviously she supported Obama's view of the judiciary and judicial interpretation, I thought she was well qualified. And I thought, wait a minute, you got a Marxist-Leninist in the White House who would be one of those guys that would order the murder of a lot of people, who is appointing a Supreme Court justice that shares his judicial philosophy. And Lindsey Graham, the great august senator from South Carolina, says, well, I thought she was well qualified.
And this is another inherent problem. Okay, first of all, you mentioned that there's really no guideline for how it should be interpreted. How hard would it be for them to say, we've had Tom Mullen talk about consent to the governed. We did a show about that. To what kind of government did the founders and the ratifiers consent? So there was no guideline, as you said. Well, refer to how to interpret this document to the ratification conventions are easy to find. The other thing is, there is no penalty for violating the terms, the oath. So you have to take an oath. What if you violate it? Well, here's the problem. Because there's no enforcement clause in here, we are getting Marxists in the White House. We are getting national, pardon my French, candidates running on platforms in direct contravention to the Constitution. They should have limitations. Well, wait a minute. Is what you're proposing to do constitutional? If not, you can't propose it. No, they have free speech for their political ideas. So that's another way to get around the limitations. You can propose these ideas under the auspices of freedom of speech and get these ideas because you can get the bottom dwellers, the voters that want the gimme stuff, to vote for it. So it all comes down to a matter of votes. We were intended to be a constitutional republic, but we have turned now into a democracy. And that's what we're seeing. When you have a democracy, everything is a fight tooth and nail. So now we're hoping for our team. We got our guys in both houses and in the White House. Now we're getting our courts. So now we've got all three branches in that little triangle here. Let's see, what do we have? Affordable Care Act was not repealed. Planned Parenthood was funded. The omnibus bill included enhanced background checks for firearms and the bump stock ban, I believe that was. So, the three pillars of conservatism are the healthcare. Four election cycles, they promised to repeal this. Again, we talked about this the other day. Not going to make McCain the sole villain for this. One vote shouldn't have mattered.
Right.
Realistically, if I violate the Constitution, just as the Constitution is written, I'll be elected to public office. If I violate a rule of TSA, then I'll go to federal court.
Yes.
And I'll be thrown in a federal pen and lock up with other great names like Ted Kaczynski and guys like that.
Well, and look at that young lady we talked about the other day. She was 11 weeks pregnant and successfully defended herself and her unborn child with her husband's firearm. Justifiable homicide, no charges pending. This young woman is looking to the possibility of 24 years in prison. Why? Because a few years ago, she was in a vehicle where there was marijuana and enough to, I guess, have the intent to distribute charge on there. So now because of that felony charge, there's a federal statute relating to firearms, which means it's unconstitutional, prohibiting for lifetime anybody that is a felon from having a firearm. There is no room for common sense in these regulations. So none of the people in this vehicle confessed to being the owners. So they charged them all and convicted them all with felonies. Now, this is where we get into the importance of jury nullification. There's going to be, we pray, either they're not going to charge her with this, or unless it's a federal charge, we need a juror on there to say this law is insane as applied. How are we going to be better or safer as a society? Because again, now turning back to this whole veterans issue, we're free and safe because of them, but our own government, who uses them as pawns, is going to throw this girl away for 24 years. The babies whose life she saved, she won't get to raise it. Mind you, if she had opted to kill this baby, that would have been okay, and we would have paid for it. Up is down and down is up. How do we make sense of this? Let's go back to this document which enabled all of this. You know, there was an article on Mises a couple weeks ago or a while back that came out. It was actually, in January, but we talked about this recently. And it's called Liberty versus the Constitution, the Early Struggle. And this is out of a chapter from Albert J. Nock's book about Charles Jefferson. And what he talks about is how this was primarily drafted by men that were representing special economic interests. 4/5 of them were public creditors. 1/3 were land speculators. 1/5 of them represented interests in shipping, manufacturing, and merchandising. And here's the big problem. Most of them were lawyers. None of them represented the interests of production. So Mark, Greg, Jeff, not only was this thing set up to fail, we say before the ink was dry in the holy parchment, I can't escape this notion that this was a Trojan horse intended to expand the power and influence of this political class from the very beginning. They have not released their stranglehold. In fact, again, with the Louisiana Purchase, Massachusetts threatened to secede over a fear that they would lose this influence. This has been a struggle for power, not freedom, from the very beginning. So we have to let go. This is not a sequel to the Bible. Let it go. You don't have any other solutions. Yes, we do. And we talk about them. Here, rethinking the American Union for the 21st century. Some brilliant minds have put forth some brilliant theories. You know, there's a chapter in here that talks about contract law and secession. And if you look back, rescission of a contract when one party commits a material breach of the terms and conditions thereof, the aggrieved party has a right to rescind. Ladies and gentlemen, the right of rescission is the right of secession. And you should see the comments we get when we talk about that, or nullification. Yeah, good luck. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, this is actually brings us kind of to where I think by now we probably frustrated enough people to say, well, all right, I agree with you guys. What do we do? Well, there are actually answers, folks. There actually are, but you cannot go on to the next until you let go of the former. And the problem is people are trying to force something into this current that cannot be forced there. So at this stage of the game, the states do need to emerge and begin to openly defy Washington, D.C. Now, don't tell me the million reasons why they can't because of the money and all the money the federal government gives them. Figure it out. Figure it out. Here's the ultimate solution. And it's in the document that, oddly enough, this is so funny, Greg and Suzanne. This scares people when I read this document. Kreslins, what are you saying? I'm saying what Thomas Jefferson said back in 17. That's really all I'm doing. These are not Mark Kreslin's words I'm about to read. They're not. I didn't write these. I didn't wake up one morning and have a brilliant flash of ideas and say, well, I think I'm going to get a pen and paper and pen these down. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men. How secure do you feel like your rights are? Not very. Ask the 20 babies whose right to life has been snuffed out today because of this government that is supposed to secure rights. Let me continue. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. This whole thing I just read is about you, and not about those megalomaniacs in Washington, D.C., who we too quickly genuflect to, or at your state capitol. Folks, those men who, oh, this just gets me, those men who died on those battlefields, those women who died and who lost their husbands and their property from 1776 to 1783 to stop a oppressive, central, powerful government that they felt was tyrannizing them, we dishonor their sacrifice when we sit there and genuflect to these megalomaniacs in Washington, D.C. Christians I'm talking to, your obligation is not to that Constitution. Your obligation is to your Savior and the truth he communicates. And what we know is a lot of lying is going on up there in Washington, D.C. A lot of murder is happening in Washington, D.C. A lot of stealing is happening right up there in Washington, D.C. How can you support that? How? We must get back to these words, folks. There's nothing scary about them, or if it's scary to you, you are not part of the solution. Just as, what's that Sam Adams quote? May your shackles rest lightly on your shoulders, and may people forget that you were ever my countrymen. If you're not ready for this peaceful political fight, continue to genuflect at this kabuki theater you're seeing up there. Cheer on the red team. Go get them, Brett.
You know, Mark, a lot of people like to go to Washington, D.C., and where do they go? They go to the mall. What's one of the first places they go to? What is one of the most iconic figures in this national government? The Lincoln Memorial.
Yeah.
Well, I go to the porta potty right behind it.
Yeah. What are the words engraved in the marble behind him? In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. What does the term temple mean? It's an edifice erected as a place of public worship, a church, especially a large or imposing one. So if you are of the mindset that what is happening today is okay with you, and you are doing nothing but paying lip service to this holy parchment that you call the Constitution, you can take this holy sequel to the Bible of yours, Go to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and go there and worship on the holy holidays or Sundays, because that's where you belong.
Yeah. Folks, you got to get this. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, when I spent lots of my time in the Army, I was at the National Security Agency for many, many years. And the one thing that I thought was a huge takeaway for me was that when I went to work, I would go through, I had lots of polygraphs, by the way. That's something they like to do to you in the intelligence community, is give you polygraphs all the time. And that's fine. Well, and based on a science that doesn't work, that's fine. That's a good idea. That's how we should be spending our money. But we all had to go through and have security clearances and have these security checks. And you did that, Mark. And excuse me, lots of people do that. Hundreds of thousands of them do that. And the system is designed to identify the trustworthiness of an individual. Now, who are you supposed to be trustworthy to? That's the part that was never explained to us.
Yeah.
It's implied that it's the state, because it would have to be. We were never honest with the people we worked with. Sometimes you were briefed on a program and somebody else wasn't. You had to lie to them and pretend like you didn't know anything about what they just found out or were talking about, where somebody else was lying to you because they were keeping something from you because you didn't, quote, have the need to know about that. So you spend your whole time lying to all these people that you're working with and trusting on a daily basis, but you're trusting that they're going to lie to you in the proper and gentlemanly manner, I would say, so that everything could continue to run as it should be running. You can't lie and be honest about it. This is the great tragedy of where we've gone since 1947, when the CIA was stood up and the National Central Intelligence Framework was put together. Immediately it took over, and it's become a huge burden on us. And we've never crawled out from underneath it. And now we have a system that's built where we have to be dishonest with people from the national level to the states in a consistent manner. We can't even tell the people who work in state governments what's going on because they don't have a, quote, need to know or some other jive like that. So when you have a society that, one, does not know God, number two, can't be honest with their friends and neighbors, can't find good neighbors, treat your neighbors. No, what are you treating your neighbor as? You're treating your neighbor as an enemy. You're treating the people you work with as strangers. I don't remember signing up for that. And one of the main reasons I left is because I couldn't be intellectually honest with myself anymore, go into work and work with the people that I'm lying to day and night, and having them lie to me and feel good about myself. I'm good, I'm special, and doggone it, people lie to me.
Mark, you had made a comment once before. We're all familiar with the famous quote by John Adams that this government that was set up is designed for a moral society. It is wholly unsuitable for any other. Well, just you pointed out that how disingenuous that is, given the fall of man, which they knew about at the time. I'll let you close up the show with those sentiments. I want to thank everybody for listening to us today. This is in your face radio, folks. This is a punch in the mouth. A lot of people don't like it. Stick around though. Eventually you're going to see we're right. And if you listen to us and we can work out this, everybody's going to do better. Everybody can have the liberty we're looking for. That's all we're trying to do. We're not trying to disrespect. We're not trying to hate certain groups. There's no need for this discord, this hatred of one country, one half of the population always unhappy, and then the other half gloating. We need to just stop this vicious cycle. Go ahead, Mark. I want to thank everybody for listening today.
Yeah, folks. We are going to be confrontational on this show, but in a way we hope you don't take personal. We're not attacking you. We're attacking the ideas that have gotten us to where we are. I want us all to remember today in your state, a number of babies were legally murdered. That haunts me, folks. That haunts Suzanne, haunts Greg. It's why we do what we're doing. And it's all being done legally and theoretically constitutionally. Folks, join us again. We're going to continue pushing back. Invite your friends. We do need to connect. We believe that you're going to be on the right side. Until we meet again, I'm Mark. She is Suzanne. We'll see you soon.